Good morning, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for joining us for the weekly Senate and House Joint Republican Media Availability. I'm Kim Wirtz, Communications Director for the Senate Republican Caucus. Joining us today are Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th District, Senate Republican Deputy Leader Chris Gildon from the 25th Legislative District, House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury from the 31st District, and then also joining us from the 20th District today is House Republican Assistant Floor Leader Peter Abarno. And with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Braun for opening comments. Senator Braun, are you able to unmute? Looks like we might be having technical difficulties. Representative Stokesbury, why don't you get us started then?
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. Welcome, everybody. Happy first day after House of Origin cutoff. We're a little tighter over in the House and the Senate. The Senate seemed to get their business done at a reasonable pace, maintaining reasonable hours. The House struggled with that a little bit. The House majority decided to work until about 2 or 3 in the morning on Friday morning, work on Saturday, work until 2 or 3 in the morning on Monday as well. All in all, we are pleased that some really bad bills died, but a little frustrated that a few other bills made it through. I think House Republicans were most concerned about 3 bills that passed this session. One is actually a bill that passed earlier in session, not this past week, but earlier, that would effectively ban natural gas for Washingtonians. I think that's the wrong direction. We need to make life better for Washingtonians, not worse. So kind of surprising that House Democrats would ban natural gas in the middle of the winter. The 2 others that passed this week that I think we're concerned with are unemployment insurance for striking workers and rent control. Both are perfectly well-intentioned ideas, but I think our concern is that ultimately they are going to do more harm than good. With respect to unemployment insurance for striking workers, it will upset the delicate balance we have in the state's UI system. It will tilt it pretty far in favor of employees and against employers. And basic economics suggests that it will incentivize strikes. And in the long run, that's actually going to be bad for workers. As Boeing and other large companies decide where to locate and grow their workforce, I suspect they will look less and less at places like Washington, where now the state has stacked the deck against them and is effectively incentivizing employees to go on strike. I don't think that's a good outcome for businesses ever, and I don't think it's a good outcome for workers in the long run. Likewise, rent control. Again, perfectly well intentioned, but with those limitations in place, it will seriously dry up the amount of capital that is needed to build more housing. The way you bring price down is through increasing supply. We have seen throughout history, including but not limited to Soviet Russia, that establishing price controls as a means to ration scarce goods does not work and leads to much worse outcomes for everybody involved. Rent control takes a page out of that exact playbook, and however well-intentioned it might be, it will not work. It will not actually lower the actual price of housing. The market will react in other ways that will be overall worse for landlords, worse for renters. In the long run, rent will go up just as much as it always has, and it won't do anything to bring real long-term rents down. For that, we need to incentivize housing, and it's frustrating that the majority party would rather do Band-Aid feel-good solutions than actually solve the hard problem of figuring out how to build more housing of all types here in Washington. So that's kind of the main things that came through the House. We did plenty of other bills. Some were a little good, some were a little silly, like banning octopus farms. But we are through House of Origin cutoff, and now we'll spend the next 20-something days dealing with Senate bills. And I see Senator Braun is on, so I'll turn it over to him. And I'm also noting that I forgot to introduce my House colleague who's with me today, Peter Abarno, who is from the 20th District in Lewis County. He's our assistant floor leader and our ranking member on the capital budget.
Well, thank you, Drew. I apologize to the group for being a little bit late. Had some communications challenges, but we're on now. I want to welcome Senator Chris Gildon from the Senate side this morning. And I'll start with what you've heard me start with before. We continue to be focused on public safety, affordability, and education in our state. I think you can see the bills that Republicans supported off the floor of the Senate line up with those pretty well. And where we oppose bills, it's because they hurt those areas, not help. And you saw us work hard to stop an enormous property tax increase that would have affected virtually everyone in our state in terms of the cost of housing, whether you're a homeowner or a renter. It's clear that property tax would have driven up costs when we can at least afford to have that happen. We worked hard to stop other bills we thought were wrong-headed and would lead to worse outcomes in public safety or affordability or education. I'm not going to go into all those this morning, given that I'm already a little bit behind. But the other thing I will mention is, we're in that part of the session where we're going to start to see the revenue forecast come out later this morning, and then all the budgets that follow. And that's one of the reasons we have Senator Gildon on this morning. He's been a key part of the budget negotiation team in the Senate. And that's going to be our focus over the next probably week and a half, in addition to committee hearings on many important House bills, some of which we like and support, some of which, as Representative Stokesbury said, do more harm to our state than they do good, and we should oppose. I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Terrific. And so we will go first to Hallie Golden from the AP. Hallie, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thank you so much. My question is for Senator Braun. Your bill to create a tribal opioid prevention and treatment account got unanimous support on Monday. I was just hoping you could speak to that passage of that bill and the importance of it.
Are we having technical difficulties again?
It looks like he might have froze up.
Okay.
If I could, I've just got a couple of remarks that I'll share with the group, and then while we see if we can get him back online, I'll say that Senator Linda Wilson and I have been working on the budget this year. We've been in the room every step of the way with the Senate majority. And we came into the budget with three real priorities this year. One is that we didn't want to see any new taxes. Two is that we wanted to see a sensible level of reserve at the end of the budget in our emergency account. And three is we wanted to develop the budget in such a way that we have contingencies in the case that any of these initiatives do pass in November. I think that we've got to realize that's a reality. It could happen, and we've got to be prepared for it. And I know that you've probably heard a lot of information recently coming out from the State Department of Revenue saying that, if these initiatives pass, that it's going to blow a hole in the budget and the sky's falling and we're not going to be able to fund K-12. But, I'll just tell you from my perspective, that's it's a little bit of fear mongering, I think, because, first rule of budgeting is you always fund your priorities. We funded K-12 education before the capital gains income tax came in. We're going to continue to fund it after. You always fund your priorities first. I mean, I'm sure in your own budgets, you don't budget for dining out before you budget for making your house payments. That's just the way that we do it. And the second thing is we don't fund priority projects with volatile income sources such as capital gains. Governor Newsom just recently vetoed a capital gains income tax because it is so volatile. And so that's just not something that we do. And so those are kind of some of our priorities in the budget. I think it's coming along very well. You should see the capital budget will come out soon, followed by the operating budget and then the transportation budget, and then we'll keep moving forward.
Thank you. Hallie, did you have a follow-up question?
Well, yeah, I was just hoping Senator Braun could respond to my first question just about SB 6099 passing with unanimous support.
Looks like we have him back now. So if you want to go ahead and repeat your original question.
Okay. Senator Braun, I'm just hoping you could speak to the unanimous passage of your bill 6099 to create a tribal opioid prevention and treatment account, and also speak to I know some tribes have some concern that maybe this money, when spread out across 29 tribes, is not going to be enough to really address such a huge crisis.
Yeah, I would be happy to, and I apologize for dropping off while you were asking your question. Continued communication challenges this morning. So yeah, I'm very pleased that the bill went off unanimously. Not surprised. This is an area we recognize. I think across the political spectrum that we have a lot of work to do. That we've, as a state, dug ourselves into quite a hole with regard to the use of hard drugs, opioids, and
we've lost him again. I'm sorry, Hallie. Perhaps after the media avail, we can connect you with Senator Braun to get the information that you need.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Hallie. Okay, next we will go to Claire Withicombe from the Seattle Times. Go ahead, Claire.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to talk about the budget a little bit more. I know your side of the aisle has noted the revenue growth in the state over the past decade or so. Are there areas of the budget where you all are proposing spending less, cutting back, things where areas of the budget where money is not being spent well or effectively? Thank you.
Are you going for it, Drew?
I was waiting for you, Chris.
Okay. So, yeah, we have seen tremendous growth in state government over the last decade. I think about a doubling of state government overall. If there are areas that I really want to see an emphasis put on this year, I think it has to do with all of our prevention efforts surrounding our opioid crisis. I think the budget should reflect your priorities, and I think one of our biggest priorities this year needs to be getting ahead of the opioid epidemic that is just hurting so many people. And so that's one of the things that I've really been pushing for this year. In addition to that, I think that we are going to be very careful that we are not tying any ongoing funding for any of the dollars related to the initiatives. We have to be very prudent in how we spend those dollars and make sure that if they are being spent, they're spent on one-time items. You see this with King County recently. They got an influx of federal coronavirus dollars, and they decided to tie those to ongoing projects. And now those federal dollars have dried up, and they're having to make some really difficult decisions in their budgeting. Compare that to Pierce County, where they use those federal dollars for one-time projects. They just recently got their bond rating upgraded to AAA by Moody's, the highest you can get. They were able to fully fund all of their priorities. They were able to add additional funding for law enforcement, for public safety. And I think it's just a tale of two counties in how you spend taxpayer dollars. And so that's some of the things that we're really working on this year.
I may just jump in and kind of build on what Senator Gildon said regarding investments. From the perspective of capital budget, I think the key is to invest wisely and take some of those larger line items and really focus them in to some of their priorities, whether that be behavioral health, substance abuse, but K through 12 as well, and really focusing on our priorities. We've got a revenue forecast coming out, and what I think we need to pay attention to is the fact that Senator Gildon is absolutely right. The capital gains tax is not a reliable source of income that we should be focusing a lot of our attention on, especially past this year. What Department of Revenue forecasted earlier regarding the amount of money coming from capital gains is going to be substantially less for a number of different reasons, and I think we should be paying attention to not only the amount that we're going to have less, but the reasons why we have less. And I think that's going to be a real interesting talking point as folks try to politicize a capital gains tax. We're going to see that it's not as big as we thought, and there's a lot of reasons not to rely on some of the forecasting for that. Just kind of on the introductory side, I think Senator Braun and Representative Stokesbury talked a lot about some of the bills that passed and the bills that died. I think some of the missed opportunities is a focus that we should really look at. There were a number of really good policies, at least from the House side and our caucus, Homes for Heroes and rent relief incentives that didn't even get hearings. There's legislation to put more police on the street, child care tax credits, removing child care restrictions, learning, recovery, and acceleration programs, higher penalties for fentanyl use in a Bureau of Narcotics, and a B&O tax and PUT tax credit for veterans and military families to incentivize their hiring. A lot of incentives that never made it out of committee or onto the floor versus I think that the real difference we saw in the priorities from at least the House majority was kind of the stick versus the carrot and spending versus really finding more efficient programs that would make what we believe probably is a bigger difference in Washington State to improve it. So just a few things just to kind of think about and look at as revenue forecasts come out as well.
And I would kind of respond by saying I am less involved in the day-to-day budget process than I was when I had my previous role as ranking member of appropriations. I know that our new ranking member, Chris Corey from Yakima, is going through the budget pretty closely, working with his team to come up with the framework and figure out how we might be able to do things better or differently. So to the extent there are unique opportunities for savings this year, probably a better question for him. But over the years, when I served in that position, would routinely identify some savings opportunities. A couple of years ago, both the House and the Senate Republicans released minority budget proposals for the first time in a very, very long time. We have often proposed budget amendments on the floor that would shift money away from things that we believe ought to be much lower priorities and towards things that should be much higher priorities. Senator Gildon and Representative Barno hit on some of the biggest priorities, biggest opportunities that we have to fund things this session that will really make a difference and really go a long way towards fixing Washington. But circling back to how Senator Gildon began, he's right. The budget has doubled in the last 10 years. That is a much more aggressive rate of revenue growth than pretty much any individual or family budget has seen, probably more than the revenue growth that most companies have seen. And, with that increase, we have more than enough to fund all of our priorities, fund the critical services that people depend on, without the need for continually raising new taxes. We should be able to have enough surplus just from the revenue growth we've experienced since we passed the last budget before sine die in 2023 to do some really exciting things like shift operating budget money over to the transportation budget to fill some of the maintenance and preservation backlog that's growing there, deal with some of the culvert issues. There's lots of things that we could do with the money, but we certainly don't need to tax people to raise more of it, and we certainly need to be doing a better job of tracking our successes and progress for the programs we are funding, so that we don't keep funding bad programs, but can instead learn from what we're doing and make tweaks and adjustments to fully maximize and leverage state dollars. And we don't do a very good job of that.
Okay, Claire, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
So next we will go to, let's see, where did I see him on here? Jerry Cornfield. Jerry, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Good morning. I'll try. Since we're on the budget, let me just ask Senator Gildon might be able to answer with some specifics, but the budget's broken into different parts. I understand there's different sums of money. So if you will, sort of blocks of money for each area. With education, what gets paid for? What are the priorities that are getting paid for that you're aware of, and what's not getting paid for? There have been a lot of bills passed on that. So what do you see coming out?
Well, I think you'll get your chance to see the budget probably Sunday evening. That's whenever I believe that the budget will be released. But I can tell you that I have full faith that we will be fully funding K-12 education. It is our paramount duty. That's something that we do every single year. I think spending per pupil has gone up over the last few years to a point now where if you look at local, state, and federal dollars, we're spending just over $18,000 per pupil. And I think that's quite a bit of money. I think that we should be able to educate our students within that. But as far as getting into any of the specifics of the budget, I'm going to have to leave you hanging for now until the budget comes out later on.
Okay. Jerry, did you have a follow-up question? I'm going to take that as a no and move on. Laurel Demkovich, also from the Washington State Standard. Did you have a question this morning, Laurel?
Sure. I guess so. Last week I asked about some policies to increase housing in rural areas, some of the ones that came up with the detached ADU bills, also lot splitting. It seems at this point that both of those proposals in both the ADU bill in both chambers didn't make it through. Lot splitting might possibly also be dead. I'm just wondering if you have any sense at this point of why those aren't making it through, and if there is any other policy or anything else we might see in any of the budgets to try to increase housing specifically in rural areas.
Yeah, Laurel, great question. Really appreciate it. Unfortunately, both are not progressing because of legislative Democrats. Representative Barkis's lot splitting bill is dead in the Senate because I believe the chair of that committee decided that she didn't want to hear it, and so she sort of effectively announced that it was dead. And Representative Sam Lowe, his rural ADU bill was something that Republicans pushed hard to run off the floor yesterday, but were told by majority leadership that there was some opposition in their caucus and there would not be enough support to put the bill on the floor. So it's a little bit frustrating. Certainly plenty of folks in the majority caucus, want to create more housing. We had great bipartisan progress with the middle housing bill last year. There, I think, was a difference of philosophy, although a shared goal for many when it came to the transit-oriented development that passed this year. I think House Republicans voted no simply because we thought it was would make the problem worse, not better. But I think we at least agree that it's a problem we want to address. So it kind of baffles me why in these cases, however, Democrats would not be willing to advance these common sense proposals. Representative Barkis's lot splitting bill passed, I think, nearly unanimously in the state house. Representative Lowe's rural ADU bill passed the Housing Committee unanimously, was co-sponsored by about a dozen Democrats. Not controversial, not partisan, not ideological, but for some reason the majority party didn't want to move forward with either one, and that's pretty disappointing.
At the risk of my computer crashing again if I speak, I'm going to try and answer this question. So a couple things. Yeah, the detached ADUs for rural counties died, and the Senate also. And I will tell you, yeah, absolutely, that's because the majority party didn't want to bring it up. But the reason they didn't want to bring it up as much as anything is because FutureWise is out there lobbying against it. Let's just be clear. We have an organization in our state who is very uninterested in addressing the rural housing crisis, and which is frustrating to me personally, and I think to our caucus, because we've worked pretty proactively to help address urban housing issues. The middle housing bill from last year the lot splitting bill that Representative Stokesbury mentioned, the transit bill from last year. These are all bills that don't particularly don't do a lot in many of the districts we represent, but we helped with those bills because we understand we need to address housing in urban areas and in rural areas. Very frustrating that we don't get the same sort of interest from the majority in addressing rural housing issues, and that's exactly where we're at. Now, there is a small bright spot out here. I'll point out, you may have missed, there was a ADU bill that passed off the floor of the Senate yesterday that expands the ability for counties to offer tax exemptions for rural ADUs, accessory dwelling units that are leased to low-income individuals. That bill passed last year, applying only to King County. This bill would expand that program out to all 39 counties. So tiny little bit there. If we can get it through the House, that will help on a marginal basis in rural areas. But the larger issues, very frustrating that we have been and continue to be willing to help on urban housing issues, but the other side is not willing. And that's largely because of the influence of FutureWise on the current Democratic majorities.
And not to pile on, but I will say that there are even policies that you don't need to pass through the House or Senate that can make a difference, and that's adjusting the AMI for affordable housing and workforce housing. The way it's set right now, it's not accessible to a lot of rural communities, having it between 60 and 80. And there's been a number of different amendments on housing bills that would increase it to 100 and even 150%. That would create more access to rural communities that would allow for them to use the housing trust fund. At this point, it's not accessible to a lot of rural communities for housing generally. I think in the last 3 years, capital budget has made some good investments in the CHIPS program, which is infrastructure for housing. The problem is, again, it needs to be connected to affordable housing projects that have such a low AMI that's just not accessible to our communities and more accessible to the urban communities.
Great, thank you. Laurel, did you have a quick follow-up?
Nope, I'm okay, thanks.
Terrific, thank you. Next, we will go to Drew Mickelson from King 5. Go ahead, Drew.
Good morning. Thanks for your time this morning. I wanted to ask about the speed camera expansion bill. It passed out of the House with 0 Republican votes. Should we expect anything different if it comes up in the Senate? And what are the caucus's biggest concerns with that bill? Because there's been lots of talk about needing to do something about the traffic fatalities, and this is what obviously the majority thinks is a good idea.
Yeah, I can't speak to the bill out of the House. I don't know the specifics of it, Drew. There was a speed camera bill that passed out with bipartisan support from the Senate. I think there are very legitimate, some privacy issues, but more just surprising travelers. And I think the solution to that, the bill that passed out of the Senate had to do with construction zones. And what we did on that one is essentially made everybody get a warning the first time, so they knew the camera's there and they knew they were being watched. And the second time, they got a very stiff penalty because this is about saving lives and keeping people safe in construction zones. So I think we're trying to be reasonable and both respect and give the public fair warning, but also make sure we keep our highway workers safe during construction. So I can talk. That's what happened in the Senate on a Senate bill. The House bill, I can't speak to that yet.
I know there was an issue about the reduced payment for lower income violators. Is that a concern in the Senate as well? I think it was a 25% lower rate that they would pay if you qualified as a low income driver. Is that a good idea?
Peter, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to?
About the speed cameras?
Yes, the lower rate should low income drivers get a lower priced ticket?
Well, I think that's always going to be a problem when we talk about whether or not you commit a crime, whether we're going to base or commit a violation or a citation, whether or not some people get different benefits. I mean, obviously, whenever you get a ticket, you have that opportunity to address the court to have it reduced based on your needs and your ability to pay. So having it in statutory language, I think, is always problematic when you're starting to set up those kind of side rails prior to somebody actually, going to court and dealing with it or merely paying it. But I think to Senator Braun's comments, I think some of the House members, and I can't speak for all of them, had some similar issues with that traffic bill.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll go to Shauna Sowersby from McClatchy. Shauna, do you have a question?
Yes, good morning. Other than the ADU bills, which you guys have already talked about, I just had a question about the bill that was introduced by Reps Dye and Barkas that to improve Puget Sound water quality, House Bill 1365. Was introduced in 2023. Looks like it made it pretty far, but didn't go to the floor for debate. Also didn't make it to the debate floor this year. So just wanted to kind of get some insight on that piece of legislation.
Sorry, couldn't find my cursor. I actually have less information about why that one didn't come to the floor. It was something that we had pulled from rules. It was a good bill. It was something that we had prioritized and asked for, but I don't think I have an answer for what happened.
I mean, I could just say that water quality is something that has been Representative Dye's big issue over the last 3 or 4 years, especially water quality within the Puget Sound and the different nutrient levels that are within the sound and how it impacts not just the ecology of the water, but also, we talk about we talk about the orca whales and sea life. There's been a number of stories over the last decade regarding untreated water being spilled into the sound and how it impacts it. And that's where the majority of people live. And so that's where I think her big focus is on improving water quality. It's come through Environment and Energy a number of times in different iterations or parts. Really proud of the work she's doing on it. And she's had a lot of big focus on some of the urban areas and their ecological issues. But I don't have any more information about why it didn't move further. I think there were some issues within ecology about the cost of it. But again, when we're talking about water quality and how that impacts the entire state, it's definitely something that's important to our caucus.
And I will just add on to that. I think not only is our caucus frustrated that the majority spends a lot of time talking about climate and environmental priorities, but just constantly turns a blind eye to the amount of wastewater and sewage discharged into Puget Sound by King County. There is another proposal out there. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but a bill from Representative Wilcox that would have essentially levied a tax or a fee on the municipal wastewater operators who discharge sewage into waterways. And use the collection from that money to fund salmon restoration projects. So that would have been a win-win by further disincentivizing places like King County from discharging raw sewage into the Salish Sea, and also providing a stream of funding to help further recover salmon. But unfortunately, that one did not make it to the House floor either.
I'll just pile on briefly, and I think that's a good bill. It was a good bill last year. It's a good bill this year, and it gets at one of the core issues. So we continue to have frustration. We continue to try to squeeze a little bit more out of stormwater, in particular on new construction. And frankly, there just aren't much gains there. While we have our biggest problems by a very large measure are our historic discharges, stormwater, sewer also. But even if we were to address historic legacy stormwater in our major metropolitan areas, we'd have an enormous impact on the Puget Sound, but we're not focused on that because it's hard. We'd rather talk about things and do things that don't matter much than deal with really hard issues. And that's, I think, more than anything, why this bill doesn't go forward. When I say we, I mean the Democratic majority, by the way.
Shauna, did you have a follow-up?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Next, we will go to Carlene Johnson from Center Square.
Good morning. I wanted to ask about Rep. Tara Simmons' bill that passed off the House floor yesterday after lengthy debate. I think it was at least a dozen Republicans who stood up in opposition and gave pretty passionate testimony in opposition. HB 2001, I think. Just comments about now that it goes over to the Senate for consideration, probably got the momentum to go through. It was so resentencing offenders, even very violent offenders. How concerned are you? I guess this is for anybody who would like to respond, but it seems like a pretty significant move in the wrong direction. There's an opinion for you.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Carlene. We've got a public safety crisis in Washington, and we need to fix that by hiring more police officers, going after drug dealers, allowing police to pursue and catch the bad guys. We don't fix that by letting the bad guys out of jail earlier. That is the exact opposite of what we would do. That will not fix Washington. That will make the public safety crisis even worse. So was, I think no brainer that all 40 House Republicans voted against it. I think there was about 6 or 7 House Democrats that voted against it, which shows you just how far left and just how far left that idea is. And I think there is some growing frustration, even the majority party, at the ability for the far left to take over their caucus and pass bills that a lot of other Democrats realize are just the absolute wrong direction for Washington State.
Yeah, this bill is just tone deaf to the public safety crisis we have going on in our state right now. Our caucus certainly won't support it, and I think there's a good chance it doesn't make it out of the Senate.
Carlene, did you have a follow-up?
Well, quickly, if there is time. Oh, sorry. A lot of talk during the session about how to approach the drug crisis, and little tweaks here and there. Some pieces of legislation attempting to address that, but bottom line, I'm guessing, is if we don't at some point, whether forcing the drug addicts into treatment therapy, to giving people a last chance, it's not going to get better, right? Because we're not going to stop the drugs at the border. That's a whole bigger issue. But any feeling about that? Because in our communities we see it. Down here in Olympia, it's worse than I've ever seen it, just driving down today.
You've seen us talk about this, and it's a multi-pronged approach. And you saw Republican bills pass off the Senate floor. Anything from messaging. Linda Wilson had a great bill proposing a new campaign on pushing back on drug use. I think that's valuable. That we can stop it up front is a good thing. To treatment, that we talked earlier about the tribal opioid bill to allow more treatment, especially where it's most needed. To other things that get after getting folks back on a better track, but also, and this is where we run into differences of opinion with the Democratic majority, also making sure there are consequences. In particular, as an example, the Linda Wilson bill that would add exposure to fentanyl to the child endangerment statute. That passed out of the Senate pretty strongly, and yet we have the chair of the committee in the House, Representative Goodman, saying no way, there's no votes for that over here, because it's literally they think making it illegal to expose young children to fentanyl shouldn't be a crime, when we have almost a doubling in deaths as a result of this exact thing. Is frankly unconscionable. So we're going to keep pushing on it, but it spans it's the spectrum. It's from messaging, trying to get ahead of the problem, trying to keep especially young adults from getting involved in drugs, to making sure we have good access to treatment, to making sure law enforcement has the tools to go after folks who are committing these types of acts, and getting them and holding them accountable where they're endangering others, and getting them into treatment where it will help them get on a better path. All of the above.
All right. Thank you, Carlene. And next we will go to Melissa Santos from Axios. Go ahead, Melissa.
Hey, I actually want to talk about a bill that it actually seems like you all like. Hold on, let me turn on my video. there was a measure that passed out of the Senate with really little Republican opposition to let DACA recipients work in law enforcement and make that easier for them. Can one of you talk about sort of what, I mean, that had got pretty big support from your caucus. Can one of you talk about, maybe Senator Braun, why that's a measure you're willing to support and how you think it might be a good policy for the state?
Well, a couple things. One, this is an issue that Republicans have led on for a number of years. Senator Barbara Bailey led on this issue back during the, when we were in the majority on with this issue. This one that Senator Torres has picked up, in large part because it reflects the needs of her community and to a large extent the needs of many of our communities around the state. We need to make sure DACA recipients have opportunity. We have a huge need for more folks in law enforcement. Makes perfect sense to us that we ought to help folks get into that profession. We have a huge challenge in our state. If we're going to rebuild our law enforcement community, we got to get our best and brightest to choose that as a career. That's hard right now because frankly, if you're in law enforcement right now, you're probably not making that recommendation to your son or daughter or niece or nephew because you feel like you've been under the gun for a number of years in the profession. If we're going to rebuild that, we got to use every method we can to encourage folks, including DACA recipients, to consider law enforcement as a career.
And I'll just add, Melissa, everything Senator Braun said about the Senate Republicans' leadership on this on the DACA issue is true. I will point out that one of the very first bills I introduced all the way back in 2015 after I got elected, or maybe 2016. It was my first term though. Was a bill to amend the statute that required police officers to be U.S. citizens, to expand it to green card holders. That was at the request of the King County Sheriff, who already back then was losing police officers and desperately trying to find enough deputies to fill his ranks. And turning away folks that have a green card didn't really serve any real purpose. So that bill, I think, passed the House that year, not the Senate, and then the following year, the Senate version passed both chambers. So Senate Republicans have been great leaders on DACA issues, and House Republicans have been leaders in terms of trying to get as many folks in the law enforcement profession as possible. And haven't seen this bill yet, but sounds like a merging of two topics that both of our caucuses have worked hard on over the years.
Real quick, there's a bill that would try and limit student restraint and isolation that died in the Senate last year. It came out of the House this year. It died last year in the Senate Education Committee, and I'm not sure the chair has changed her mind about this issue. I haven't spoken to her yet, but is your caucus in the Senate, Senator Braun, or anyone else who wants to speak to this, supportive of this measure to limit student restraint and isolation? It's 1479 that came out of the House. And would you like to see that come out of the Education Committee?
I'm going to be careful how I answer this. I think if it's the same bill as last year, I think there's a lot of concerns that remain. We have many of us have been big proponents of increasing inclusion in our classroom, but you have to be careful where there is risk of physical violence and high level of disruption within the classroom. I want to be careful how we address the methods that educators have to deal with that. My understanding is there have been significant improvements to that bill, that they really did a good job of engaging with educators to make sure that we're both protecting these students, which I think everybody agrees we should do, but also making sure that we can protect the teachers and other class members or classmates at the same time. So I haven't studied the bill in detail yet. I was actually just talking to Representative Rude last night about this bill, and he tells me that it made quite a bit of improvement in the process. If that's the case, I'm sure it'll get a good hearing in the Senate, and we'll see where it goes from there. But while I don't disagree with the objectives of the bill's proponents, I think we have to be very, very careful, very thoughtful how we do that we don't do more harm than good. And I'm hopeful that the changes made before it left the House do exactly that. We'll see.
Yeah, I will echo exactly what Senator Braun said. The bill has changed a bit from last year. It's a project that Skylar Rude, who's the ranking member on education for the House Republicans, has been working on almost nonstop throughout the interim. And as Senator Braun alluded to, it's a really tough issue. There are really important things to balance on both sides, the safety of students, but also the safety of teachers. It is hard, which is why even after a year, there is still not unanimous agreement over the exact right balance. But Republicans have worked really hard to make this bill better and hew more closely to the needs of both students and teachers. And so I'm really proud of Skylar's work on it. But it will remain a tough issue, as I think was reflected in the vote count, where our caucus was sort of almost divided in half, but it has gotten a lot better, and that would not have happened if it weren't for Skylar.
All right, thank you, Melissa. And finally, we will wrap up with Jeannie Lindsay from KUOW. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Hello, good morning. Thank you. I wanted to ask early on, I recall Republicans talking about your priorities coming into this session around affordability, education, and public safety. Now that we're past the House of Origin cutoff, I just wanted to ask how you would characterize progress on those priorities this session. Is it going super amazingly, kind of mid, or is it still a catastrophe? Just if you can sort of give us a sense of how you're feeling about progress on those priorities you laid out at the start of session.
Sure. So, yeah, I characterize it this way, and not yet had a chance to study all the House bills that came over there, and that may affect my feeling on this overall. I would say on public safety, a few, I think minor, on one major, I think win. One, we passed a bill out that would help protect law enforcement officers who are assaulted off duty. I think that's an important thing, as we both hold them accountable for their actions, but also make sure they have a healthy work environment. We also, the bill I mentioned earlier from Linda Wilson that would add exposure to fentanyl to the child endangerment statute, I think is a good, important win. If we can get it through the House, I think that's a challenge. But the biggest bill in public safety in front of us right now is the initiative that would repeal the 2021 changes to the Pursuit Act. I think on that one, the jury's still out. We have been insisting in both chambers that they get a hearing and ideally in a vote. So far, it's got neither. But I am told that may be coming shortly. So I remain optimistic. But I think that will really be the biggest factor on public safety. On affordability, I think that we are, we're the best characterization is fighting a slow retreat, because we have this onslaught of bills from the Democratic majority that just keep piling on to the cost of homeowners and to the cost of food and housing and childcare, and not intentionally. I don't think. I think it's just one more regulation that adds more cost. Now, we did have, I think, a significant win there when we pushed back on Senate Bill 5770 that would increase the growth rate on property taxes. And I think the people of the state of Washington really spoke up loudly on that issue, and thankfully, finally, the Democrats in the Senate listened. But we're not turning the corner and actually making improvements yet. And then on education, I think probably the best news there, the best progress there, and I'll mention a few bills that I think make some good progress, and I think the budget will be the other important factor. But we passed a bill that would help make it easier for schools, especially rural schools, to qualify for the special education safety net, where they're spending more than their multiplier on special education students. We passed a bill that would get after chronic absenteeism in a way that's been piloted on a small scale before, and this will be a statewide pilot to try to get kids back in the classroom. And it's an area where, compared to the rest of the country, Washington is struggling. And then it's not a mystery that kids have to be in the classroom to learn and to catch up on learning loss. So that's, I think, an important win. And then the last one, a really small bill, but happens to be my bill, and I'll mention it, is a simple bill that will allow schools more flexibility for transportation, allows them to choose other forms of transportation than a big yellow school bus when they're not moving a lot of children, and still get reimbursed from the state under the transportation formula. So these are, I think, small but meaningful steps in the right direction. We're going to keep pushing on that, but that's how I would characterize progress so far on the 3 priorities.
Jeannie, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
All right, and with that, we will wrap up. I'll go to Senator Braun, who can give us closing commentary.
Well, Jeannie's question basically captured my closing comments. That we can remain focused on those things, those top 3 priorities: public safety, affordability, education, and from the minority, we're having some wins and some losses and some draws, but we're continue to focus on that because we think that's what the people of the state of Washington care the most about, and it's the most important thing to them in their daily lives. And we'll do the same as we evaluate the House bills that come over. So I appreciate everyone being here this afternoon. And one thing I want to do is I don't see Haley still on the call, so I didn't get a chance to finish your question. If you are there somewhere, I'll call you and give you a follow-up on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I will echo what Senator Braun said, and kind of in response to the last question as well. I think over in the House, a little disappointed that Republican ideas to fix all these problems did not get the traction that they probably deserve. And, it's certainly frustrating when it appears that political factors can sometimes outweigh policy making. I think there's a few bills that we passed that will probably make some of our problems worse. Like I said at the top of this hour, however well-intentioned rent control might be, I think it will, in the long run, lead to less housing and more unaffordable housing. Likewise, I think providing unemployment benefits to striking workers will, might be nice for those on strike in the short term, but in the long run will mean fewer jobs and less affordable places to live, work, raise your family here in Washington. I'll also point out that when the initiatives to the legislature were introduced, Republicans in the House moved to instruct the committees to which they were referred to hold prompt public hearings. Each of those motions were defeated by House Democrats. In Florida Bay, we were told that there was plenty of time in session to hear things, and these decisions should be left up to committee chairs. Well, we are rapidly running out of time. This is day 38 of a 60-day session. We've got 21 and a half legislative days left. Many committees are only meeting a few times between now and sine die. So last week, ranking members of House committees sent letters to chairs asking for hearings on these. I don't think we have received responses yet, but I'll be checking on that this week. And starting next week, I think we'll be working hard to continue to draw attention to this and making sure that people who sign these initiatives, 400,000 signed each initiative, over 800,000 Washingtonians signed some initiative, make sure they have a voice in the process.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again next week.